David, it looks like now components are going to be tariffed on top of the assembled vehicle tariff of 25%. Is there any thought that the Trump administration is willing to change that?
They might. There are a lot of discussions going on, top executives, government affairs executives, all talking to people in the Trump administration. What they want to do, they sort of want to kind of keep as much of the USMCA deal as possible. So with USMCA, if vehicles qualify the way the Trump administration has laid out the tariffs now, any non-U.S. content would get hit with a tariff. So you take something like a Chevy Silverado pickup truck made at the plant in Mexico. Probably half of that content is made in Mexico because the engines and transmissions are done down there, and other parts like wiring and stuff like that. So, that's a $50,000 truck. Half of that value, $25,000, would be hit with a 25% tariff. The automakers are looking for relief on that other part that would be hit with tariffs. Because otherwise, even if a vehicle qualifies for USMCA, it can get quite heavily taxed when it comes across the border, and then they have to try to pass that on to customers. And we have the same issue we would have with a vehicle that's made 100% in Mexico, Korea, anywhere else. It really makes even USMCA compliant vehicles in Mexico and Canada subject to very heavy tariffs.
Well, let's talk about the passing on of costs a little bit more. We heard from President Trump telling NBC over the weekend that, quote, he couldn't care less if they raise prices because people are going to start buying American cars. We're awaiting some of those delivery numbers, David. Are we expecting to see any of that pull forward behavior on the part of consumers?
Yeah, we'll probably see a fair bit of it. Just anecdotally, we've talked to a lot of consumers ourselves who've been kind of, in a mad scramble to buy vehicles before tariffs kick in. My mother called me last night and asked me if she should go ahead and do this. So I think it's happening in some, significant numbers. We'll see how much. And you probably won't know how much pull ahead there was until we look at sales in April, May, and June to see if they're down at all. But we're going to see some. We're definitely hearing that March was the strongest of the 3 months in the quarter. It traditionally is because the weather gets better and people actually go out and start kicking tires at dealerships. But all the data I'm seeing says it was a very strong March, and some people are definitely trying to head off tariffs and get out there and buy or lease while the getting is good.
I wonder why the big U.S. automakers, David, the big three, don't source more of their component parts in the U.S. Is it because they're internal combustion engines still for the most part? If we look at a chart of the average domestic content in U.S. vehicles, Tesla is able to source 81% of its component parts domestically, whereas Ford and GM only do 54%.
I don't think it has much to do with whether it's EV or internal combustion directly. Look, Tesla is a startup, and they vertically integrated a lot. They even make their own seats, which they didn't necessarily have to do. But I think a lot of the parts, batteries, engines, they do get battery components from overseas. But because it was a startup that had to kind of create their own ecosystem, their own supply chain in a lot of ways, I think Elon Musk's solution was always to look, if we can't find someone who knows how to do this quickly because it's relatively new, we'll do it ourselves. And I think also he didn't want to give some supplier a bunch of the profit margin. So they make a lot of their own stuff internally, and they're going to do it very close to their own factories because why deal with longer supply chains than you have to? I think when a company starts with a blank canvas like they did, you can do things like that. A lot of the components we're talking about that would be sourced in Mexico. It's wiring harnesses, very labor intensive. I talked to an executive at a major seat manufacturer yesterday who said stuff like cut and sew, right, for seat leathers and seat fabrics. That's very high intense, low value add, heavy labor kind of stuff. You have people stitching and sewing seat parts. Those are done in Mexico, and then because the wages are cheap, and then they ship them up to the U.S. and actually make the seat out of it. It's stuff like that.
David, I want to also point out we are getting some of the data out from the car makers via Ford, saying that overall retail sales rose 5% in the first quarter. March results drove a lot of that. It increased 19%. They're speaking to the sales of the F-Series growing 24%, and electrified vehicle sales totaling a record actually for Ford of 73,600, a little more than that in the first quarter, which is up 26%. You know, I know we're looking through the numbers. You're talking to us here, but what do those numbers signal to you, especially ahead of more Tesla data tomorrow with the electrified sales?
So two things. With a strong March like that, that tells you that there probably was a good sized group of people going out and buying vehicles in anticipation of April tariffs. People read the news and they don't want to pay thousands more per vehicle. On the EV side of it, you know, we saw it in the fourth quarter where people were worried about the tax credits going away, so they went out and bought. I think you might be seeing a second wave of that in the first quarter because, you know, to the extent that people think that sometimes Donald Trump says things and talks a big game but doesn't do it, he's levying these tariffs. He has threatened to take away vehicle tax credits, and buyers might be saying, hey, if he's going to put a tariff on vehicles, and that's going to drive up the cost of an EV, maybe he is going to make good on his promise to get rid of Joe Biden's IRA tax credits, which could be as much as $7,500. So, you know, do you want to pay an extra $3,000 to $5,000 in tariffs and lose a $7,500 tax credit? So an EV buyer might be extra motivated even compared to somebody buying an internal combustion vehicle.